Hey everybody, welcome to the Free-motion Challenge live check-in. I'm Angela Walters here on YouTube, and I'm super excited that you're joining me for this little chat where I'm going to show you a little bit about the Free-motion Challenge. I'm going to answer your questions, and we're going to kind of just see what the next couple weeks has to store for us as far as the Free-motion Challenge goes. I'm going to kind of overview it in just one second, but I'm going to check over. Okay, good. I always like to make sure everybody can hear me. That's always my biggest fear. I got to tell you, when I started planning this challenge back in December, I had no idea that the week that we would launch it would be so dramatic for everybody. What a crazy couple of days it's been. Our shop is closed, but the online store is still running and the challenge is still on. And I think that's amazing that it worked out that way, because I sure need something to do. And so hopefully you do as well. And so I hope everybody is staying safe out there and enjoying your quilting time. Hopefully you're getting some quilting time. And a huge thank you to everybody that is still working in the healthcare industry and just keeping the world safe. So appreciate that. But let's just take a break from all the drama that's out there and let's just talk about quilting. That's, something that we all love and something that we can all kind of just, have our quilting therapy together. So when I put together the idea of this challenge, the Echoes and Curves Free-motion Challenge, it's mostly because I knew that Serpentine Lines get kind of a bad rap. I mean, I feel like it's one of the most undervalued design. It looks so good on quilts, but it can be a little tricky for some quilters. So I thought, why not devote a challenge to this really cool design? However, I know that not everybody loves it as much as I do. I'm hoping that with some tips and tricks and some practice, you will love it as much as I do, but I will have some options. So if you're practicing and you're like, this isn't working for me, then of course, we can definitely switch that out with something different. So we're going to do a little slideshow where I kind of show you what we're going to be working on, talk through some pictures, and then I'll come back and answer your questions. Since I am by myself, of course, got to stay sequestered, I'll be kind of skimming through the YouTube chat to try to catch some of those questions. Normally I have somebody here to kind of help me along with that, but I'll try to grab your questions. If I don't get to them, leave them in the comments below the video after the episode's done. So I won't be able to see the chat after we're done. So if I don't get your question, go to the video and leave it in the comment section. Okay, so let's check out some pictures. So what we're going to be working with, of course, is this particular panel. I designed it so that it would have all those fun, different, regularly shaped areas that we could quilt in there. However, yours might look a little different once you get to quilting, but what we're going to do is throughout the challenge, we're going to start with our serpentine lines. So right here is the design that we're going to work with. Now, in that first video, we're going to have plenty of kind of breaking down the shape. We're going to talk about how to practice it, maybe even practice on a little piece of fabric before we get started, and then get to quilting it. So we're really going to kind of see that part. I'm going to also show you how to troubleshoot problems. How do you know what the problem is as you're working, and we'll talk about that, and where and when to actually use this on a quilt. If you've listened to any of my videos, you know this is something I talk about a lot. It's one thing to know how to quilt this design, but it's a totally different thing to know where do you put it on a quilt. How should you use it? So we're going to see some quilty eye candy in that first video. Once we learn the design, once we kind of get a little bit more comfortable with it, then we're going to talk about turning the corner. Right? It's all fun and games until we have to go turn the corner like for a sashing or a block. And so we're going to see how to do it, and I'm hopefully going to give you enough reassurance that even if it doesn't look perfect, it's going to be fine. We're also going to talk about some variations. So we're going to see some different options you have. Here will be one of the variations that we're learning, where we spread out the serpentine lines and put a little bit of feathers inside of it. We'll also see a couple different ones where we change direction and where we overlap. And so a lot of different variations. Now, in my classes, in my videos, when I'm teaching variations, it's not meant to be overwhelming or intimidating. It's meant to be kind of like my persuasive argument to make you love this design as much as I do. I'm basically saying, look at all the cool things that this design can do. I think you should try it out on your quilts. So don't let the variation part get overwhelming. It's mostly just to make it as versatile and, as useful as we can. Then we're going to kind of tackle those irregular areas of our quilts. So we're going to talk about the plume feather. Now, I love the plume feather. I think it's so elegant looking. It's perfect when you need something just a little different, maybe not quite so rounded as a feather, maybe not quite so, maybe not quite that more custom look. If you want more of a ferny look, or maybe it's a more masculine quilt or a nature-inspired quilt, then that plume feather is definitely going to work. And one reason I really love it is it fits any irregular shapes. So you can see here in this block, I'm kind of creating this irregular shape and filling it in with a plume feather. So we're going to be doing that a few times, and we'll also see how this is the first time we'll talk about echoing. So we're going to get out our rulers if you want. We'll answer that in the FAQs here in just a second, but we're going to get out the straight edge rulers and we're going to do some echoing. So when I talk about echoing, really there's a couple different applications of that technique. Sometimes I use echoing to make a space more manageable. For instance, if this center block is too large, I can use echoing or more quilted lines to kind of make it smaller and easier to manage. But you can also use it to highlight different parts of your block. So we're going to see a couple different examples of this. When it comes to echoing, and I won't go into the lesson right now, but when it comes to echoing, the side that you echo is what you're going to highlight, is what is highlighted. So for instance, I could echo the outside of my blocks, or I could just add a couple echo lines and then fill in with some serpentine, or I can do something that extends out like this. And so being mindful or even just being aware of how echoing can create those different effects is really going to help you take that technique and put it on your quilts in a really interesting, unique kind of way. So a couple more examples of the echoing here and in the background as well. So again, we're going to really kind of talk about using those reference lines on your rulers, if you're using a ruler, to keep it straight or keep them evenly spaced. We'll also talk about using the edge of your foot as a guide. You might think that I can't talk very long about straight lines, but you would be surprised. I could definitely talk about echoing for quite a while and more echoing. So that's where we're going to see it in that different week. And another example here, how I'm using echoing to kind of group those light blue fabrics or those light blue triangles together. And again, we can see some more of those pretty plume feathers. That will be quilting on the quilt. All right, and then we're going to move into the background areas of our quilts. So we're going to learn a filler or a way to use wavy lines to break up the negative space or the background and then fill in between them with serpentine lines. And we're going to see an example of this in just a moment. But this is an example here of using echoing and serpentine lines. So we're going to kind of bring it all together in video 6, where we're talking about, okay, using these two different things together to create a different effect. And so straight line echoing and those nice curvy serpentine lines, and then even highlighting some different blocks, pulling it out from the background just to kind of show off those colors. And you can see another example of it right here. So it's going to be a lot of fun. It's kind of interesting to me how we can start with a basic serpentine line, a shape that is so, there's not a whole lot to it, but you can use it in so many different ways and get a really cool effect on your quilt. So it's going to be fun to run from blocks to negative space to motifs to everything. So it's going to be a blast and a little bit more of example of what we'll be working on. Now, with the thread collection that comes with the kit, or the optional thread collection, we're really going to talk about how sometimes thread colors are deceiving. So one of the colors that we'll be working with is actually Pale Mist. It's a light green, but it looks so beautiful on those light blues. And so I picked it because it just looked so nice. So if you're looking at the thread collection thinking, but there's no green in the quilt, you're going to see just how pretty it looks on those lighter blue colors. And there is the background filler that we'll be working with. So breaking it up with wavy lines, quilting in them serpentine lines, and highlighting those blocks. So it's going to be so much fun. All right, so now we're going to do a quick little show and tell portion. It's amazing how much free time you have when your whole schedule clears and you're at home. So I went through all my old quilting pictures that I did for customers and found some pictures of serpentine lines just to see them, what they look like on actual quilts. And this one right here is a fun example of strip quilts. I loved quilting strip quilts because that grid, that guide is already there for you. It's, you already have those reference lines and you can just work your way across. And I loved how switching up the direction kind of created a secondary effect where they almost kind of look like whale's tails a little bit, a little pointy. Of course, you wouldn't have to do that, but I am easily amused, so changing up the direction was definitely a lot of fun for me. And I love using serpentine lines in strips and sashing. It tends to be best in areas that are about, 2 to 4 inches. I don't use them in huge borders because they get really long, but definitely in, pieced blocks, grouping them together. In smaller sashings around outsides of the quilts, it's a great option, especially if you remember from our borders and backgrounds challenge. I really love designs that touch the sides of the border so I can transition from one border to the next. And so that design is definitely going to help do that. And so we can get a little close up over here. And again, turning the corner. And I just love the serpentine line, especially in busier fabrics, because that spacing is consistent. So you get that beautiful texture, but it doesn't take away from the fabric. So this is something I use, especially in blocks or pieces where the fabric is the most important thing. If it's not the most important thing, in that instance, I might do a variation or something a little bit more intricate, but definitely for those busier fabrics, I love the serpentine line. And we can see another little close-up over here. I tried to find out the information on these quilts, but I'm not even sure who pieced that. I feel bad about that. So in this example, this is the back of a quilt, and I'm kind of showing how using wavy lines to break up your negative space is a good option. It makes it a little bit easier, to kind of take that background and create your chunks. However, in this example, I filled in with wishbones, and that's going to be one of the variations that we'll talk about. Using those wavy lines to break up the negative space is great, and then you can fill in with whatever you like. Just because I'll be using serpentine lines like I did over here doesn't mean you have to. We'll talk about some different options as well. And then I think I have a closer picture. There we go. What's fun about the serpentine line is it needs a boundary. So it needs something on both sides to kind of run into. That's how the design kind of works. But those lines or those boundaries that it runs into doesn't have to be a seam or a border. It can be a wavy line or it can be a row of swirls. And so here I'm just kind of filling in that irregular shape, adding those serpentine lines, even though it's not a hard boundary, but it still works. So once you get comfortable with it, you'll be able to fill it in between lots of things. Maybe you'll put it between a block and a motif, or the edge of the quilt and another quilting design. It's just going to fill in that space and look lovely, especially when it's next to those swirls. A little bit of contrast and spacing really kind of makes that pop. All right, I do know who this one was for. This was a quilt I quilted for Camille Ross Kelly. And we're doing a retreat together in September, and my fingers are crossed that it doesn't get canceled because it's going to be in San Diego. It's going to be fun. Anyway, I did this quilt for her years ago, but it's a good example of using that serpentine line in sashings. This was probably 3 or 4 inches if I remember correctly, but you can also use it in blocks. So in stars, 8-pointed stars, this is definitely a fun design to use, and we're going to see another example of this in just a moment. But again, in that print fabric, that beautiful print that she had designed, I used the serpentine lines just to keep it more basic and soft. And then in those solids where I really wanted the quilting to pop out, that's where I put the echoing and the dense quilting. So it does seem kind of backwards. You might think, oh, if I love the fabric, I should put all the interest in there. But sometimes it's better to keep it more basic in the fabric so that you can see the beautiful prints that you're quilting on. Okay, so this is an example of using it in a totally different way. I was playing around on the chevron quilts, quilting it for a customer, and I just couldn't decide what to do in this area. And these are pretty small. I think, if I remember correctly, I think they were like 2 inches. And so I thought, ooh, I'll quilt serpentine lines. And so I kind of quilted this serpentine line that changed directions, almost like it was corner after corner. It wasn't the easiest to do. There's a lot of flipping around on that, but I loved how it looks. I love how it looks. And once you kind of work your mind around it, it gets a little easier. So sometimes you can take that basic shape and use it in a completely different way. I had actually forgotten I had done that, and so now I'm like, oh, I should probably try that on another quilt. All right, more strip quilts. So jelly roll quilts are perfect. That 2-inch spacing, I just feel like is perfect for a serpentine line. You know, and in 2 inches, I can't really fit a whole feather, but I can definitely quilt a serpentine line. So you can see here where they overlapped each other, I just, or where this block kind of joined, I just overlapped them a little bit and changed directions. Again, in that busier fabric, keeping that spacing consistent, a nice, pretty texture, I think is just perfect, especially in those irregular shapes, especially in those points. That serpentine line by nature kind of goes up into that point and kind of back down. So it's perfect for those areas. And we can see another example right here. When we talk about turning the corners, we're going to talk about a couple different options. And this is one right here where we're kind of creating a motif in that corner. This is important if I want them to go different directions on each side, kind of like, this is supposed to be like a flower. So instead of turning the corner, I want it to be more like a motif. But that's a nice, easier option for turning the corner if you're not sure how to rotate the design. So that's a cool example on a strip quilt. Log cabins especially would be that way as well. And there's a close-up of the border. Now this border was pretty large. I want to say it was like 5, I don't know how big it was. But once you get, to that larger border, it's hard to sustain that curve for so long. So that's why I like to use it more in those more narrow borders, those narrow sashings. But by the time I started this, I was committed to doing it. I had to go ahead and just keep working it around. But sometimes when you get done with a quilt, you learn what not to do, and sometimes knowing what not to do is just as important as knowing what to do. And here's an example of the filler where I'm using those wavy lines and filling in between it with serpentine lines. And again, you can see how it's going to really kind of work in those irregular areas. We'll kind of talk about how to extend it out and what do you do in those areas that are too small. Now these are actually pretty tiny. I think they're only about 1/4 inch apart. So you can really shrink it down if you want to give it, a more dense look. But if you've watched any of my videos or if, you've been in my class, I say all the time, it's not the size of the design that determines the density. It's the spacing between the lines. So just like any other design, you can shrink that spacing in between it and kind of have it nice and dense, or you can spread it out depending on how much you love the person you're quilting for or how much time you have, because sometimes that plays a role in it. All right, so remember I said in those pointed stars, and this is a quilt pattern by Julie Herman, and in the diamonds, those nice serpentine lines. Now this is actually a slightly different variation. I call it a faux rope, where you kind of have like half feather on each side, but that serpentine line just really kind of fills that diamond perfectly with those points and extending out to there. So definitely great for those. And you can kind of get a backup view of the whole quilt here, and you can see in those points. And I loved how the serpentine lines just kind of contrasted nicely with the feathers. Again, in this quilt, the most important thing was the prints. Her pattern was important, of course, but she had used Tula Pink's newest collection at the time. So keeping the quilting fairly, basic for me-ish, basic-ish, really lets those prints shine. And then using some echoing around the blocks kind of helps show off her pattern. So I was kind of trying to achieve both things in that regards. So a lot of pictures to say we're going to learn about a stretched out S line, serpentine line, but it's going to be a lot of fun. So hopefully you'll join me. Of course, like all of the challenges are, you don't have to have the panel. You don't have to pay for it. There's no charge. All you need is some fat quarter sandwiches and get ready to quilt. Now I will be demonstrating this on a sewing machine like I always do, and then I'll show on a long arm as well, a little bit. I do have some tips and tricks on a long arm because the tricky part about this design is controlling that momentum as you're quilting, and so we'll definitely see that. Now I'm going to click over to the YouTube chat and see how everybody's doing, if there's any questions, and then we can definitely answer those for you. So one gal said, I didn't do the last challenge and was so envious of the fun everyone was having. Not this time. I'm ready. I got everything. The great thing is that you can hop on the challenge whenever you're ready. You know, even if you're, busy right now and you can't get to this one, then you can definitely do it at your leisure. So that's a lot of fun. But there is something about that community aspect. I heard a quote one time that I thought was perfect. It said, the brain will do difficult things if it can do it with other people. Now, I don't remember where I heard that. I might have made it up. No, I did hear it somewhere. But the idea is when you're kind of commiserating together or learning together, it just makes it less scary, less difficult. So definitely a lot of fun. Let's see. I thought I saw a question. Oh, how would you suggest improving the ability to free motion designs? Just practice? So great question, Velvet. And this is something I'm asked all the time. And I usually feel kind of bad because people will pay to take a class and then they'll hear me say, oh, just practice. I know that's not always the answer that you want. I will tell you that most of machine quilting is just knowing where you're going. So that practice doesn't even have to be at a machine. Drawing out the designs really helps because it helps you learn the path so that when you get to your machine and you can actually quilt, then all you have to do is kind of refine that and work on the, to the hand part of it. So doodling will be really helpful. Another thing that helps, I think, is practicing on an actual quilt. Now, I know that's scary. Anytime I say that, people get really nervous. Like, oh, I don't want anything to happen to my quilt top. Practicing over a whole quilt does a lot of things. You have to, work your way around blocks. You have to fill areas. And when you're done, you have that sense of completion and accomplishment. So if you don't want to use your quilt tops, panels are great, busier fabrics, but ultimately you get better at what you do when you do it consistently. So just practicing. But I promise, it doesn't take as much time as you might think. It will come pretty quickly, I promise. You just have to do it. All right. Glenda said, I've never done any of your classes, but this one looks like one I could actually do, or looks like I can actually do it. One question I do see a lot on the Free Motion Challenge, and I'm going to eventually put together some free FAQs for people to check out. All the challenges are kind of standalone. They don't build off each other necessarily. The technique or the design is kind of on its own, but you do get better as you practice. So whether this is your first one you've done or you've completed all of them, you can jump in wherever you'd like. So Betty Lou, what do I do with all my samples for learning? They become part of my trunk show. So when I travel, I get to show them at the end, what to practice. And so it's kind of fun. Although you all would be so, embarrassed for me. None of them are bound. And I've never really worried about that because I'm not into binding. I love the raw edge quilt. You know what I'm saying? I like when the batting can breathe. Okay, I just really don't like binding. But the last guild I was at when I was in Rio Grande Valley, I was almost like, okay, now I have a lot of challenge quilts to show because I think we're on number 7. I should probably bind some of them. So I'll work on that. Okay, so Velvet said, everything you said makes sense, and that's what I'm doing. I'm a costume seamstress. Listen, if you can make anything 3D, a bag, a shirt, you're fine. You will be fine. You just have to kind of, if you tend to be a perfectionist, just have to let it go a little bit, but it'll be really easy. You'll do fine. Okay, where do we get on the challenge? Bonnie, if you sign up for my email newsletter, which will be in the video about section, they're emailed to you, or you can subscribe to my YouTube channel and get notifications. You can also join the Facebook group. So the Free Motion Challenge Facebook group is a lot of fun. Everybody's on there sharing pictures of what they're working on. giving tips and answering questions. It's a great resource because I can't answer everybody's questions. I definitely try, but it's a great resource to kind of hop in on there. You can also go to FMQ, like Free Motion Quilting, fmqchallenge.com. That will have all the previous challenges kind of stepped out there for you, so you can, pick which one you want to start with. This one doesn't actually start until April 10th, and so if you're ready to get quilting now or get warmed up, you can take one of those earlier challenges. Let's see. Kathy, you love how I finally got around to saying I don't like to bind. I got to tell you, I don't love it. I wish I did, but I saw somebody asked a question about the size of a machine, right? So what happens if you have a smaller machine? Just use it. Most people don't use the tool that they have to its full capacity. So even if it's a small threaded machine or a long arm, something in between, you can definitely do it. Remember, we're just kind of focusing on an area this much. I mean, our hands are on both sides of that needle, so we're not quilting much further than that. The rest of it is just smushing and pushing. So don't worry what kind of machine you have, just make sure you have a free motion foot. That's the most important thing. Karen, good question. Any help for lefties? I have trouble trying to mirror when you demonstrate the curves. Okay, my daughter is left-handed, so that's the only experience I have because I'm right-handed. I will say that there really isn't any specific tips for left-handedness. I will say that when I went from long arming, because I went from hand quilting to long arming to sewing machine, that it was hard because it's a different movement. Right? So I was like, oh, okay, I would move the machine this way, but I move the fabric that way. Just look at the design and kind of internalize the design and then practice it. So it won't be super helpful, I guess. I mean, I don't think it really makes a difference. One side will just feel more comfortable than the other, but that's the case for everybody. So don't let that get you hung up. I promise it'll click and it'll come pretty quickly. All right. Oh, Pat said she would bind mine. That's awesome. Let's see. And David, if you don't do Facebook, it's fine. You can still find it on YouTube, or you can still find it on my website. So definitely can work on that. Kyle, do I recommend that you start with quilting juice before practicing? Okay, so when it comes to practicing free motion quilting, some people, not myself so much, but some people are very distracted by that need to be perfect, almost like that critical analytical part is kind of critiquing what you're doing while you're doing it. Does anybody resonate with anybody there? Usually if I'm in a class, I don't look at anybody because I don't want them to think I'm saying that's them. But if you have that critiquey voice, or if I'm in a class and I hear somebody like, oh, this isn't looking good, I'm like, listen, we need to disable that or distract it. And so what I start doing to people in my classes is I will talk to them. I'll ask them questions while they're quilting. So that analytical part is like trying to answer my question while they're quilting. Sometimes we just have to get out of our hands' way so it can do what it wants to do. So a glass of wine is a great way to distract that critical part of your brain. Okay, however, not everybody likes wine and not everybody condones drinking and quilting. I, for one, love it. But audiobooks work the same. Music, something to distract yourself, maybe holding a conversation with somebody at the same time. You could try that and see if that helps, because sometimes just kind of getting that analytical part. See, Marty, I knew it. There you go. If you're a perfectionist, one thing that you can try to do is replace the word perfect with finished. You can say, okay, I wish these swirls were finished, because there is no such thing as perfection in free motion quilting. I will tell you that when I've worked with people that have more perfectionist tendencies, they're usually, not to stereotype, but they're usually perfect piecers, beautiful patchwork, and then I'm asking them to use a different side of their brain, and they're like, no, this is not any fun. So you just kind of have to get over that little bit. But what I find with people like that is they'll quilt a few, they'll get, discouraged, and they'll rip out or they'll stop. But you have to keep making mistakes. You have to put all those mistakes around it until it all just kind of goes away. So try not to worry too much. Yeah, Kathy, I'm a scientist, and Yeah, but see that critical part, sorry, Kathy says, I'm a scientist, my critical part gets in the way of free motion quilting. Well, this is what you want when you're a scientist, right? A doctor, a architect, this is very important. Machine quilting, it's different. So it's a chance for your critical part to just relax and have fun. All right, so a couple of questions. Brenda, hey, I drink Coke while quilting. Is that wrong? No, if that's wrong, I don't want to be right. It's totally fine. Okay, a question that came up that I was seeing a lot, two questions that came up through, the Facebook group and the YouTube videos. First of all, does the backing fit the borders? So if you do get the optional kit, optional panel, which you saw in the beginning of this live chat, there is the option to add borders. I know that after, I don't know how many challenges it took me, but I'm like, wow, everybody adds borders to their panel. Maybe I should make this easier for them and design a border panel. If you get the panel and the borders in the backing, it still fits, right? So it does still fit. You don't have to worry about getting a different size backing. If you're listening to this and you have no clue what I'm talking about, then just pretend like you didn't hear the last few sentences. So the backing does fit if you put the borders on it. There's also coordinating solids that you can use as well if you want to make your own borders. I know that some people love to create their own things, and I love seeing that, so very fun. Second question is, do you need a ruler for the challenge? Okay, when we get to the echoing part, we're going to be doing some straight-ish lines, and so I will be demonstrating how to use a ruler. You don't have to use one though. So if you're quilting along on a sewing machine, you can definitely freehand those straight-ish lines. But if you do have a ruler and a ruler foot, a straight edge is all that we'll be using. And we're going to kind of see how to use that to get our nice even spaces. Now on a long arm, I'm always using a ruler because there's a lot of diagonal lines on here. And on a long arm, I can't freehand those diagonal lines. It looks just really bad. So you don't have to have a ruler, but if you have a straight edge ruler and a ruler foot, then get them out because it will make the echoing a little bit easier. Let's see. And on the answer, just two more questions and then we'll move on. This is not a question, but D, that's funny. You crack me up. You're so real. Fell in love when I showed my messy quilting room. So true. And Cecilia, you like my, yeah, those are goats on trees. So my friend got that for me. I love it. Okay, anyway. See, look, I'm easily distracted. Okay. I saw it and I lost. Oh, stitch length. How do you get that consistent stitch length? It will come from practice. Again, sorry I have to tell you that, but when you're focused on your stitch length, that's like worrying about your handwriting when you're still learning your letter. So if you could just try not to even worry about that, it will work itself out. In my classes, I usually tell people that ask that question, oh, we'll do that. We'll talk about that at the end of class because usually by then the problem has resolved itself. So just don't focus too much on stitch length. It will work itself out, and it's okay if they're different sizes. Now, don't do anything that I say and expect to win an award at a quilt show, but definitely if you're trying to finish up those quilts or get more confident, just don't worry about it right now. It will definitely work itself out. Okay, Donna, great question. Is it possible to show some of the stitches from behind the machine instead of the same side that you're sitting? Yes, it is, and I will do that. I'll include some of that. I was kind of thinking earlier today, this will probably be the best challenge I've ever done because it's pretty much all I'm doing right now. So since all of my events have been canceled, everything at the shop is canceled, I'm just so thankful that it just happened to work out that we have the challenge right now. And so I can definitely include a little bit of the more creative editing so you can kind of see how that works. I love hearing that kind of thing because I want to see, what it is that's going to help you learn. Okay, so, all right, I think that's going to be it. I'm going to go ahead and let you go. Now, once I end the video, it will stay on my YouTube, but I won't be able to see the chat afterwards. So it kind of goes away, but you can go leave a comment on the video and then I can answer it there. And if you go leave a comment, I'm having a giveaway. So I'm going to give away a fat quarter bundle of the coordinating solids that go with the kit or with the panel. So there's 8 fat quarters. So all you have to do is leave a comment on the video, not on the live chat, because remember, I'm not going to see it. So you can hang out for just a second and click the link, come back, click the link, and you can just say hi, hey, whatever. I'm going to draw a winner tomorrow afternoon. So it's a quick giveaway, just one day, and all you have to do is leave a comment. So for a fat quarter bundle, and I will contact you. I'll comment on if you're the winner, I'll comment on it, give you my email, and you can email me your information. So, all right. I hope I've answered your questions. I hope you're excited about the challenge. We are going to learn some fun stuff, and you're going to be the master of the serpentine line by the time we're done. All right, I look forward to interacting with you on Facebook and seeing you for the first Free Motion Challenge. Happy quilting, and stay safe out there, everybody.